Miss Copley is refusing to hear us." The accusation crossed the glass-roofed winter garden of Norchester House before Alice Copley had even seen the speaker's face. It was the 4th of May, 1872, and nearly 40 of London's most curious aristocratic patrons had gathered beneath palms, hanging ferns, and panes of pale afternoon light to witness Mr. Simeon Frobisher's celebrated whispering chair. Alice sat in the centre of them all. A green silk screen rose behind her shoulders, cutting her off from the person who had whispered and from half the room's expressions. The chair itself was upholstered in plum velvet, with polished walnut arms and brass fittings that gleamed as though beauty might excuse whatever was hidden inside. Alice kept her spine straight. Her gloved hands rested lightly in her lap. She had learned long ago that stillness made cruel people uncomfortable. Frobisher stepped beside the chair, his broad face arranged into professional sorrow. "You saw her, ladies and gentlemen." Lady Muriel spoke at the prescribed distance. Miss Copley gave no response. Several patrons leaned toward one another. Alice caught fragments from moving lips. Obstinate, pride. Perhaps the illness is exaggerated. She could not follow every mouth at once. Overlapping speech became motion without meaning. She turned her head toward the nearest clear face. "I was told I had been invited to observe your apparatus, Mr. Frobisher. I wasn't told I would be used to endorse it." "No one has asked for an endorsement," Lady Muriel Thurlow replied from behind the green silk. Alice could not hear the words, but she recognized the older woman's reflection in the glass beyond the palms. Lady Muriel's mouth moved with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly when she could not be understood. Frobisher smiled toward the patrons. "Miss Copley is understandably cautious. Many people who have lived for years with impaired hearing fear disappointment." Alice turned until she could see him fully. "You have mistaken caution for consent." A soft rustle passed through the winter garden. Fans paused. A subscription pencil stopped above a printed list. Frobisher's smile tightened. "The chair has helped 5 persons distinguish speech at a whisper. A 6th demonstration would allow the charitable committee to expand production." "Then ask someone who has agreed to be your 6th demonstration." Lady Muriel emerged from behind the screen. At 56, she wore rank as some women wore jewels, with perfect confidence that no one would question its weight. Her lavender silk gown brushed the tiled floor. "Alice, don't turn a generous effort into a scene." "I didn't arrange the chairs," Alice said. "I didn't send the invitations, and I didn't place myself here." That answer brought silence, though Alice knew silence only by the sudden stillness of lips and shoulders. Lady Muriel looked past her toward Frobisher. He moved to the side of the apparatus and touched a small brass lever near the rear leg. "Let us make one final attempt. No pressure, no embarrassment. Lady Muriel will speak again, and Miss Copley need only repeat what she hears." "I've already said no." "And yet," Lady Muriel replied, now standing where Alice could see her, "you have allowed us to believe for weeks that you wished to help. I allowed you to invite me to look at a chair." Alice drew one measured breath. "I did not allow you to turn my body into your advertisement." A gentleman near the entrance stepped away from the cluster of late arrivals. Alice had seen portraits of James Thurlow, 7th Duke of Norchester, but the paintings had not prepared her for the economy of his attention. He did not enter by making the room aware of his title. The room noticed because he appeared to notice everything. Tall, dark-haired, and dressed with restrained elegance, he looked first at the green screen, then at Frobisher's hand, beside the lever, then at Alice. Instead of speaking from where he stood, he crossed the tiled floor until he was directly within her line of sight. Only then did he address her. "Miss Copley, did you consent to this demonstration?" She saw every word, no exaggeration, no softened pity. "No, Your Grace." James turned to Frobisher. "Then it ends." Lady Muriel's brows rose. "James, you've arrived at the final moment. You haven't seen what the apparatus can accomplish. I have seen a woman say no while a room debates whether she means it." His tone remained even, that made the rebuke sharper. Frobisher spread his hands. "Your Grace, no harm was intended. We are dealing with a delicate subject. Miss Copley may feel that failure reflects upon her." Alice opened the black leather case resting beside her reticule. The hinge gave a small, familiar resistance. Inside lay a steel tuning fork, lightly tarnished along the stem, its two prongs darkened by 17 years of careful use. The engraving caught the Winter Garden Light, WC2AC, 1855, her father's initials, her own. The year scarlet fever had changed the boundaries of her world. "Failure does not reflect upon me," she said. "False claims reflect upon the person making them." Frobisher glanced at the instrument. "A tuning fork proves very little about speech. Then you won't object to my using it." She lifted it by the stem and struck one prong gently against the small padded block inside its case. A low vibration passed through the steel. Alice could not hear its tone as others might, but she knew the faint sensation through her fingertips. She placed the stem against the polished walnut arm of the whispering chair. The wood answered. A pulse traveled beneath her palm. Not sound as language, not a word, a physical tremor carried through the structure. She waited until it faded. "Now," she said, looking at Lady Muriel, "whisper whatever phrase Mr. Frobisher prepared." Lady Muriel hesitated. Frobisher gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The older woman stepped behind the green silk again. Her lips vanished from view. Alice kept her face forward. She saw Frobisher watching her. She saw the patrons watching him. Somewhere behind her, Lady Muriel whispered. Alice understood nothing. No word formed. No consonant separated itself from silence. Then the chair arm moved beneath her hand. A deliberate pulse. Her fingers tightened, not from surprise, but recognition. Frobisher leaned forward. "You felt it?" "Yes." Triumph brightened his expression. Then the apparatus carried the whisper. "No." Alice removed the fork from the wood and faced the room. It carried a vibration. "The distinction is academic. The distinction is the whole truth." She lifted the fork where every patron could see the engraving. "This was given to me by my father in 1855. He used it to help me understand what I could feel and what I could hear. They are not the same." Frobisher's confidence faltered, but only for a breath. "You reacted at precisely the moment," Lady Muriel spoke. "I reacted when the chair moved, and the movement came from her voice." Alice looked down at the brass lever beside his hand. "Did it?" James followed her gaze. Frobisher moved his hand away. The Duke stepped nearer to the chair, though not nearer to Alice. He inspected the walnut arm, the laver, and the narrow space where the green screen met the floor. "What did Lady Muriel say?" he asked. Alice met his eyes. "I don't know. Can you guess?" "I could invent an answer." "That would please Mr. Frobisher more than the truth." A flicker of dry amusement touched James's face and vanished. "And what is the truth?" I felt the chair tremble. I did not hear a word. He looked at her for a long moment. Not through her, not toward Lady Muriel for confirmation. At her. "I believe Miss Copley." The words altered the room. One patron lowered his subscription list. Another stepped back from Frobisher's display table. Lady Muriel came around the screen with colour rising beneath her powder. James, surely you don't intend to condemn a charitable invention because one disappointed woman is sensitive about her condition. I intend to stop using Miss Copley's name. His gaze remained on Frobisher immediately. Your Grace, the committee has already printed prospectuses. Then you will correct them before another is distributed. Frobisher bowed, but resentment hardened his mouth. As you command. No, Alice said quietly. Every face turned. Not as he commands, because I never consented. James looked at her again. This time the smallest change in his expression suggested approval rather than surprise. Miss Copley is right, he said. You will correct them because the claim is false. The demonstration ended without applause. Guests drifted toward the doors in subdued clusters, carrying their unfinished opinions with them. Lady Muriel left without looking at Alice. Frobisher gathered his papers too quickly and followed. Alice remained seated until the winter garden had nearly emptied. She returned the tuning fork to its black leather case and closed the clasp. Then, beneath her resting hand, the walnut arm of the whispering chair gave two short, identical pulses. No one stood behind the screen. No one was speaking. The two pulses remained in Alice's mind long after the chair had gone still. They had not resembled the fading tremor of the tuning fork. They had been sharper, evenly spaced, and deliberate. By the time she returned to her modest rooms in Bloomsbury that evening, she had written down the order of events 3 times so that memory could not soften what had happened. Lady Muriel had whispered. The chair had trembled. The guests had departed. Then, without a voice behind the screen, the walnut arm had delivered 2 identical taps beneath Alice's hand. At 9 o'clock the following morning, a footman from Norchester House brought a sealed note. James Thurlow requested that she return to the winter garden at 11, accompanied by any respectable woman she chose. He wished to examine the apparatus in the presence of a cabinet maker. Nothing would be attempted without her consent. Alice read the final sentence twice. Men of rank often announced protection as though it were a command dressed in velvet. The Duke of Norchester had written a request. At 11, Alice entered the winter garden beside an elderly widow who sometimes accompanied her to pupils' homes. The glass roof held a grey London light, and the palms cast thin shadows across the tiled floor. The crowd of the previous afternoon had vanished. Only James, Lady Muriel, Simeon Frobisher, and a cabinet maker stood near the whispering chair. The green silk screen had been folded against the wall. The door to the adjoining gallery remained open. Alice noticed that before she noticed anything else. James crossed the room, stopped where she could see him clearly, and bowed. Thank you for coming, Miss Copley. Your note made it clear that I was free not to. You were. His gaze moved briefly to the black leather case in her hand. You felt something after the room had emptied yesterday. It was not a question, but neither was it knowledge he had possessed when he wrote. Alice had included the detail in her reply. 2 pulses, she said. The same strength, the same interval. No one was speaking. Frobisher gave a restrained sigh. Old wood settles, metal contracts. A chair is not a cathedral organ. It cannot be expected to remain entirely silent. Alice looked at him. Settling wood does not usually count to 2. The cabinet maker lowered his eyes, concealing what might have been amusement. James gestured toward the chair, but did not approach it. Before we begin, I would like the limits of this inquiry stated plainly. Miss Copley may stop it at any moment. No one will touch her. No one will alter the apparatus unless she agrees. Lady Muriel folded her hands over the head of her cane. James, this theatrical caution is unnecessary. Yesterday proved otherwise. The words were quiet. Lady Muriel's mouth compressed. James returned his attention to Alice. Will you explain what you can hear in your own terms? Alice had answered that question for physicians, relatives, curious hostesses, impatient pupils, and strangers who believed volume was the same as clarity. She had rarely been asked without an opinion already waiting to replace her answer. Scarlet fever damaged my hearing in 1855, she said. I can understand some lower voices when the speaker is near me, facing me, and standing in sufficient light. I use the movement of the mouth as much as sound. If several people speak together, I lose most of what is said. If someone stands behind me, I cannot see the words. A whisper is usually nothing I can distinguish. Frobisher opened his mouth, but James lifted one hand. Let her finish, Alice continued. I can feel vibration through wood and metal. That does not mean I know which word caused it. A knock on a table can tell me that someone wishes for my attention. It cannot tell me what that person wishes to say. James looked toward the case again. And the tuning fork? Alice opened it. The steel lay in the worn black lining, its engraving visible beneath the pale morning light. My father gave it to me after my illness. Dr. William Copley wanted me to understand the difference between a sensation I could detect and speech I could comprehend. He taught me not to pretend certainty merely because others were impatient with uncertainty. Something in James's expression altered. It was not pity. It was recognition of discipline. May we repeat yesterday's conditions? He asked. Alice studied the chair. With the mechanism disengaged first. Frobisher's shoulders stiffened. There is no need to begin with an inactive apparatus. Then there is no need for me to sit in it. James turned to him. Disengage it. Frobisher moved behind the chair and drew back the small brass iron lever near the rear leg. The cabinet maker crouched to observe without touching. Alice sat, keeping the tuning fork case on her lap. Her companion remained within sight, near the open door. Lady Muriel took her place behind the green silk screen after it had been unfolded again. Say any phrase you please, Alice said. Lady Muriel's lips disappeared from view. A moment later, Alice caught only the faintest blur of sound, too indistinct to carry meaning. The chair remained still. What did she say? Frobisher asked. I don't know. She said, the morning is cold. Then I did not hear it. Frobisher stepped toward the lever. Now we shall engage the instrument. Alice watched his hand. The brass piece moved forward. Lady Muriel whispered again. Before Alice could identify even the presence of a voice, two short pulses passed through the walnut arm beneath her fingers. They were identical to those she had felt after the guests departed. What did she say? Frobisher asked. I don't know, but you felt the transmission. I felt two taps at the moment of speech. That does not make the tap speech. James walked to the side of the screen. Lady Muriel, say nothing further. He took a folded paper from his coat, wrote a short sentence, and showed it only to Alice's companion and the cabinet maker. Frobisher moved closer. James folded the paper before he could see it. I will speak, the Duke said. Mr. Frobisher cannot know the phrase beforehand. He stepped behind the screen. Alice placed her palm upon the walnut arm. James spoke in a low voice. She knew the instant at which he began because she saw the faint movement of his shadow through the silk. The chair delivered two taps. Nothing in them told her whether he had mentioned the weather, the room, or her name. Repeat the phrase, Frobisher said. Alice shook her head. James emerged and held the paper toward her. It read, "The east door has been left open." Alice looked at the actual east door. It was closed. "I heard none of it," she said. James gave the paper to the cabinet maker, who confirmed the words matched what he had been shown. Then the Duke faced Frobisher. "The chair tells the sitter when an answer is expected. It does not tell the sitter what answer to give. That conclusion is premature. Then answer Miss Copley's question from yesterday. Were your successful subjects given their phrases in advance?" Frobisher's expression settled into injured dignity. "I will not expose private patients to insinuation. That was not my question. Norchester's name is attached to a charitable enterprise, Your Grace. Public doubt may destroy work that could improve hundreds of lives. If the work depends upon prepared answers, public doubt is the least of its difficulties." Lady Muriel stepped from behind the screen. "You cannot withdraw support because one woman failed a demonstration." Alice rose. "I did not fail. I refuse to claim I had heard what I had not." James held Lady Muriel's gaze. "Until the apparatus has been independently examined. The ducal endorsement is withdrawn. No further prospectus will use Miss Copley's name, initials, history, or likeness." "You would ruin the venture without proof?" Frobisher asked. "I am withholding my name until proof exists. You appear to regard those as the same thing." Frobisher bowed with visible effort. "As you wish." The cabinet maker moved to the rear of the chair. "Your Grace, may I inspect the root beneath the floor?" James looked to Alice first. "Miss Copley?" She nodded. The cabinet maker knelt near the skirting board, where the chair's narrow base met the wall. He passed 2 fingers along the carved molding, then stopped. A small section of wood had been cut and replaced so neatly that the seam vanished beneath dark polish. He eased it outward with a slender tool. Behind it, wrapped in green silk to prevent rattling, a narrow tube disappeared through a drilled hole beneath the skirting board. "This does not end inside the chair," he said. "It goes into the wall." Alice closed the tuning fork case. James took it from the edge of the chair to return it to her. Their fingers met over the worn leather clasp. The touch was accidental and brief, yet neither withdrew at once. His eyes lifted to hers. There was no triumph in them, only attention. Alice released the case first. Behind them, the cabinet maker leaned closer to the hidden opening. "Whatever this tube carries," he said, "someone meant it to travel beyond this room." By the 6th of May, the first consequence arrived. Before Alice had finished arranging the slate cards for her morning lesson, Miss Evelyn Harcourt, a widow of 42, who had spent 3 months learning to follow speech by watching the shape of words, did not come herself. Her maid brought a folded note and avoided Alice's eyes. The message was courteous enough to wound more deeply than open insult. Miss Harcourt's brother believed continued instruction unnecessary now that modern apparatus had apparently restored Miss Copley's own hearing. Until the newspapers clarified the matter, the lessons must cease. Alice read the note twice, then set it beside the untouched slate. Her rented drawing room in Bloomsbury was small but carefully ordered. 2 chairs faced each other near the window so that every speaker's mouth would be visible. A narrow mirror stood on the mantel, used only to teach pupils how expressions changed the meaning of words. Nothing in the room claimed miracles. Alice taught attention, patience, and the imperfect art of meeting another person halfway. A newspaper paragraph had undone months of that work in 6 lines. She unfolded the sheet, delivered with the note. Near the bottom of the society column, beneath an announcement of a countess's dinner appeared a report of Mr. Simeon Frobisher's remarkable charitable invention. The writer claimed that a long-standing female case had responded to speech too low for ordinary conversation after a single sitting in the whispering chair. The initials were not printed, but the reference to a physician's daughter and the year of illness made concealment meaningless. Alice folded the newspaper with deliberate care. Anger tempted the hands to become careless. She would not give it that victory. At 11, a knock sounded through the floorboards rather than clearly through the door. Her maid entered and announced the Duke of Norchester. James Thurlow waited in the hall until Alice's elderly companion had taken her place near the window. He entered only then, carrying his hat in one hand and a calling card in the other. He stopped where the daylight fell across his face. "Good morning, Miss Copley. Your Grace." His gaze moved to the folded newspaper, then to the unused slate on the table. "I received a copy an hour ago." "Then you know Mr. Frobisher has cured me without the inconvenience of asking whether I am cured." A faint line appeared beside James's mouth. It was not amusement at her, but recognition of the absurdity. "I've sent notice to 3 editors that Norchester House does not endorse the claim. That may stop tomorrow's paragraph. It won't restore this morning's pupil." He looked at the note beside the slate. "May I?" Alice handed it to him. He read without comment, though his expression hardened at the sentence, declaring her lessons unnecessary. "How many pupils depend upon your instruction?" 6 at present. 3 more have written to inquire. If they believe I secretly hear and have built my work upon pretense, I shall have none. Then the damage is not merely social. Social damage is rarely merely social for a woman who earns her living. James returned the note. "You are right." No defense followed. No reassurance that his name would repair everything. Alice found the absence of easy promises unexpectedly steadying. He placed a folded prospectus on the table. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and expensive. A small engraving depicted the whispering chair beneath a wreath of laurel leaves. The printed claim was more direct than the newspaper. Miss A. C., a long-standing case, now responds to the lowest voice. "Where did you obtain this?" Alice asked. A footman found a bundle prepared for delivery at Norchester House. Lady Muriel had ordered them, placed with the invitations for her next subscription meeting. Alice read the sentence again. Her initials looked more intimate than her full name would have done, as though secrecy itself invited speculation. "This is not a misunderstanding." "No." James's voice was quiet. "It is a decision made after you refused." "I shall keep the original." "Of course." He did not reach for it. "My solicitor can examine a copy." Alice looked up. "You expected me to fear you might take it." "I expected you to have reason to fear that anyone with more power might decide. Possession was protection." The answer was too precise to be accidental. She thought of the winter garden, of his command that Frobisher stop using her name, and of the brief touch over the black leather case. "You listen carefully, Your Grace. Professionally, I have often been paid to hear what men prefer, not to say plainly. That is not always the same as listening." His eyes held hers. "No, I am beginning to understand the difference." The admission remained between them, restrained but personal. Alice folded the prospectus and placed it inside her writing desk. "What do you propose?" A second inspection of the chair. 2 neutral witnesses. No demonstration before guests. You decide what is attempted. "And Mr. Frobisher?" "Present. He cannot claim ignorance of the conditions later." Alice considered the cancelled lesson, the false paragraph, and the 2 pulses that had travelled through the chair after everyone had left. Very well. But the prospectus remains here. It does. By 3 o'clock, they stood again in the winter garden of Norchester House. The whispering chair had not been moved. Its plum upholstery remained smooth, the walnut arms polished, and the green silk screen folded against the wall. The same cabinet maker waited beside a solicitor's clerk who had been instructed to record every action. Lady Muriel sat near the palms, her lavender gown replaced by dark blue silk, and her displeasure left entirely uncovered. Frobisher stood behind the chair with one hand near the brass lever. This repeated examination is becoming injurious to public confidence, he said. Public confidence survived printing's Miss Copley's initials without permission, James replied. It may endure an afternoon of truth. Alice placed the black leather tuning fork case on a small table within reach. She did not open it. Today, she wanted to feel the chair before adding any vibration of her own. The cabinet maker pointed to the silk-wrapped tube disappearing beneath the skirting board. I have not opened the wall, Your Grace. I examined only what was visible yesterday. The clerk recorded the statement. Alice moved around the chair slowly. The right arm felt slightly heavier beneath her palm than the left. She pressed lightly along the underside and found a narrow area where the wood carried a colder firmness, as though metal lay close beneath the surface. The speaking tube enters near the back, she said, but the pulse does not begin there. Frobisher gave a dismissive breath. Miss Copley is not trained in mechanical construction. No, Alice said. I am trained in noticing what reaches me and what does not. James came to stand on the opposite side of the chair. Show me where you feel the pulse. She placed her palm flat against the right arm. Here, not near the tube, closer to the front. He looked toward the brass lever. May I show you where the movement begins when the mechanism is engaged? The question was directed to her, not to the witnesses. Alice nodded. You may. She kept her palm on the walnut. James moved behind the chair and placed one hand on the lever. Before operating it, he returned to her side and set 2 fingers lightly beside hers upon the wood. He did not cover her hand or close his fingers around it. The contact was intentional, careful, and warm enough that Alice became briefly aware of every place their skin did not meet. Ready? He asked. Yes. He reached back with his free hand and pressed the lever. A sharp pulse passed beneath their fingers, then a second. Alice felt the movement first near the front of the arm. A fraction later, a softer tremor traveled toward the rear where the speaking tube entered. James's gaze lifted to hers. He had felt the sequence too. Again, Alice said. Frobisher stepped forward. The apparatus is not intended to be operated without a speaker. That is precisely why we must do it, she replied. James pressed the lever a second time. 2 taps, front first, rear second. Alice removed her hand, but the memory of his fingers beside hers remained with inconvenient clarity. The pulse is separate from speech, she said. It begins in the arm before anything could travel through the tube. The cabinet maker knelt and examined the underside. There is metal inside this section, not merely a hinge, something narrow, perhaps a strip or rod. Frobisher's face tightened. A stabilizing brace. A brace does not need to count, Alice said. Lady Muriel rose. Must every detail be interpreted as deceit? You are damaging a charitable work because your pride was touched. Alice turned until she could see the older woman clearly. My livelihood was touched. My name was used. My condition was misrepresented. Pride is the least of what stands between us. James handed the cream prospectus copy to the solicitor's clerk. Prepare a formal notice. All distribution is to cease. No initials, history, likeness, or testimonial connected to Miss Copley may appear again. Frobisher's composure slipped. You are condemning 5 successful instruments because one subject refuses cooperation. Alice looked toward the printed stack on the side table. 5? Frobisher went still. She picked up another prospectus. Beneath the claim about Miss A.C. appeared a list of installations. There were 6 addresses, 3 private houses, Norchester House, Frobisher's lecture room, and 1 chair marked as returned by a former subject. Alice raised the page. Your prospectus lists 6 chairs, Mr. Frobisher. His eyes moved toward Lady Muriel before returning to Alice. A printer's error. Then where is the 6th chair? Frobisher did not answer. The 6th chair had not vanished. It had merely been described badly enough that no one with rank had thought to ask where it stood. On the 9th of May, James Thurlow's solicitor arrived at Norchester House with a narrow packet of delivery receipts tied in grey tape. Alice sat near the long windows of the morning room with her elderly companion beside her, while Lady Muriel occupied the sofa, as though the inquiry were an inconvenience arranged for her personal offence. Simeon Frobisher stood near the mantel. He had been invited because James insisted that no man should later claim evidence had been discussed in secret. The solicitor placed 6 receipts in a row across the table. 3 chairs were delivered to private houses in London, he said. 1 remains here. 1 was sent to Mr. Frobisher's lecture room. The 6th was delivered to a residence in Bloomsbury and returned within 10 days. Alice leaned forward. Each receipt carried a date, an address, and a carrier's mark. The final sheet bore a note written in another hand, apparatus unsuitable for continued use. Who wrote that? She asked. Frobisher answered before the solicitor could. The owner's nephew. The lady was nervous and easily discouraged. Was she deaf? Her hearing had declined. Did the chair help her? Frobisher's mouth tightened. She would not persevere. James stood at the far side of the table where the light reached his face. That is not an answer. It is the only fair answer. Instruments require cooperation. Alice looked at the receipt again. The address belonged to a respectable townhouse near Russell Square. The name had been covered by a separate strip of paper at the solicitor's request. Why conceal the owner? Lady Muriel asked. Because she has not consented to public identification, James replied. Lady Muriel gave a small, impatient movement of her fan. This devotion to consent has become very fashionable. It has become necessary. James did not raise his voice. He rarely needed to. The solicitor lifted another paper. A note reached my office this morning from the former owner. She had learned Miss Copley was asking about the 6th chair. She wishes to speak with Miss Copley privately. Alice felt the room sharpen around her. Privately meaning without Mr. Frobisher? Yes, Frobisher's indignation came at once. If accusations are to be made about my apparatus, I have the right to hear them. No, Alice said. You have the right to answer what is properly brought before you. You do not have the right to sit beside a frightened woman while she decides whether to speak. Frobisher looked toward Lady Muriel, but Lady Muriel's gaze had settled on James. You cannot permit this, she said. A private meeting between 2 impressionable women will produce nothing but suggestion. James's expression remained still. Miss Copley is neither impressionable nor under my permission. He turned to Alice. Would you like me to accompany you? The offer was careful, yet the weight of his title entered the room before he could prevent it. Alice considered the unnamed widow, the returned chair, and the note that had been sent not to a duke, but to her. "No, Your Grace." A fraction of surprise crossed his face. She continued before anyone else could seize the moment. "Your presence might make her feel protected. It might also make her feel she must give an answer worthy of a duke. I need to know what she chooses to say when no one powerful is waiting for it." James held her gaze. There was no insult in his silence, only thought. "Then you should not go alone. I had not intended to." Alice glanced toward her companion. "I will take a respectable woman she already knows is present. No solicitor, no secretary, no member of House Thurlow." "Agreed." His answer came without resistance. "My carriage can take you." "A hired carriage will draw less attention." "Then I will arrange one without ducal markings." Alice almost objected that she could arrange her own transport. Then she saw what he was doing. He was not insisting upon his presence. He was removing a practical difficulty while leaving the choice intact. "Thank you," she said. Lady Muriel snapped her fan closed. "How touching. We have turned an inquiry into a lesson in manners." Before Alice could answer, the morning room door opened and 2 visiting ladies were announced. They had not been expected by Alice, but Lady Muriel had apparently refused to suspend ordinary social calls merely because her charitable enterprise was under examination. Within minutes, the quiet table became part of a crowded drawing-room conversation. One visitor asked James about Vienna. The other spoke rapidly to Lady Muriel about an upcoming musicale. Frobisher moved toward the windows and began a low exchange with the solicitor. Alice followed the nearest speaker until another voice crossed from the side. Then a third. Mouths moved too quickly. She caught the shape of her own name, then laughter she could not place. The taller visitor turned toward James with a bright expression. Everyone smiled. Alice did not. She had missed the remark entirely. The old familiar pressure rose within her. Society treated a missed joke as a small failure of grace, as though good breeding should allow a woman to understand words that never reached her. James looked at her. He did not repeat the remark in a louder voice. He did not pause the room and announce that Miss Copley had not heard. Instead, he took a calling card from the silver tray, turned it over, and wrote one line with the pencil beside the visitor's book. He slid it across the table into her sight. "Lady Hartington says, Vienna taught me diplomacy. Vienna would deny responsibility." Alice read it. The dry precision caught her unprepared. A laugh escaped her before she could reduce it to the restrained smile expected in a drawing room. James's eyes warmed. He had not merely restored the lost joke. He had made a new one for her alone. "Your Grace," she said, still smiling. "I suspect Vienna has stronger evidence than you do." "Vienna usually does." The exchange lasted only seconds. No hand touched. No improper familiarity entered the room. Yet Lady Muriel saw it. Her face changed almost imperceptibly, the corners of her mouth losing their social softness. Frobisher saw her notice. That mattered more than either of them intended. When the visitors departed, Alice returned the calling card to James. "You could have written what the lady said. It was not worth preserving." "And your answer was?" "Marginally. You judge your own wit generously. A duke must preserve some privileges." The lightness faded when they entered the winter garden. The cabinet maker had left the wall panel open from the earlier inspection. Chair A remained intact, positioned where it had stood since the first demonstration. The silk-wrapped tube passed from the chair's rear assembly through the small aperture beneath the skirting board. Alice crouched near the opening without touching the apparatus. The tube angled downward before disappearing into the wall. If it carried sound toward the chair, she said, why would it continue beyond the chair into another room? James stood beside her, not so close as to crowd her. It may not carry sound only in one direction. Alice looked up. A speaking tube can be reversed. A hollow pipe has no loyalty. Speak at either end, and the other end may receive it. She studied the green silk wrapping. Then someone behind the wall could hear what was said near the chair. Possibly. Or what was said near the gallery. James's expression hardened as he followed the route with his eyes. The west gallery lay beyond the adjoining wall. It was where household callers waited, where servants passed messages, and where conversations lowered because people assumed distance was privacy. We still do not know where it ends, he said. No, Alice rose. But we know Mr. Frobisher built something that may listen as well as speak. A footman entered, carrying a sealed note addressed in an unsteady hand. It had been delivered from Bloomsbury. Alice opened it while James waited without asking to see. The message contained only an address, an hour, and one sentence beneath them. Alice read it once, then again. James watched her face. What does she say? Alice folded the paper carefully. She says, I never heard the phrases. I was told when to say them. By the 13th of May, Norchester House had resumed its ordinary social rhythm, with the determination of a household, pretending nothing unusual had happened beneath its roof. Carriages rolled into the square from 11 onward. Footmen carried cards across the entrance hall. In the morning room, ladies arranged themselves beneath gilt mirrors while gentlemen stood near the long windows and discussed Parliament, railway shares, and the weather with equal confidence. Alice had been invited because Lady Muriel insisted that withdrawing from society would make her appear guilty. Alice had accepted for the opposite reason. She would not allow Frobisher's claims to drive her from rooms she had every right to enter. Her elderly companion sat near the hearth. James stood across the room, beside a diplomat recently returned from Vienna. He had greeted Alice correctly when she arrived, entering her sightline before speaking, and waiting until she looked at him. Since then, the room had grown steadily more difficult. One conversation began near the mantel. Another crossed it from the sofa. A woman in yellow silk laughed while turning her face away. Two gentlemen spoke over each other beside the tea table. Alice caught fragments from mouths and expressions, but the fragments refused to form a whole. She followed Lady Muriel's remarks until a baronet interrupted from the side. By the time Alice turned toward him, the company had already answered with polite laughter. The sound reached her as a soft confusion without shape. She smiled because the room expected it, then disliked herself for doing so. Across the carpet, James noticed. He did not interrupt the gathering. He did not raise his voice or repeat whatever had been said. Instead, he moved to a small table in Alice's line of sight and placed one finger upon its polished surface. He tapped once. The movement caught her attention more clearly than her name, spoken from behind, ever could. When she looked at him, he pointed subtly toward the conservatory doors, then lifted his brows in a question. Alice understood the offer. Not escape. Choice. She shook her head. She was not ready to leave. James inclined his head and remained where she could see him. A few minutes later, Lady Muriel turned toward Alice with a smile too smooth to trust. Miss Copley, Lord Hartwell has asked whether your pupils are taught to read thoughts as well as lips. Alice had not seen Lord Hartwell speak. She faced Lady Muriel directly. only lips. Thoughts are generally less reliable. Several people laughed. This time Alice saw it happen. James's mouth curved. Lord Hartwell, a narrow gentleman with pale whiskers, stepped nearer. Then perhaps I should keep my face turned away. That would make conversation easier for us both. More laughter followed, sharper now, and Lord Hartwell retreated behind his teacup. Alice felt a small measure of satisfaction. Yet the room continued to thicken around her. The movement of fans, cups, sleeves, and mouths became exhausting. Lady Muriel invited a young Viscountess to play the pianoforte. Chairs shifted at once. People crossed between Alice and every useful line of sight. Someone brushed past her shoulder from behind, and she startled before she could stop herself. James appeared before her, not touching. He placed one finger upon the table between them and tapped once. Alice looked up. "May I take you somewhere quieter?" he asked. For a moment, he held out his hand where she could see it. He did not take hers. Alice placed her gloved fingers into his palm. The contact was deliberate, and because it was deliberate, it felt more intimate than the accidental brush over the tuning fork case had done. James closed his hand lightly around hers and guided her through the moving company. He did not hurry. He adjusted his pace when a gentleman stepped into their path, and he kept himself between Alice and anyone approaching from behind without making the protection conspicuous. They passed through the conservatory and entered the West Gallery, where portraits of long-dead Thurlows watched over a broad runner and a row of tall windows. The air was cooler there. Conversation from the morning room softened into a distant, shapeless murmur. James did not release her at once. Neither did Alice. He waited until her breathing steadied, until the tightness between her shoulders eased. Only then did she loosen her fingers. He let go immediately. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He stood facing her, leaving enough space that she did not feel enclosed. Was the single tap useful? Yes. It gave me somewhere to look. Then we should make its meaning exact. One tap for attention. One tap for attention, she agreed. And two, a warning, perhaps, or an interruption that cannot wait. James considered that. "If I am speaking when you want me to stop." Alice glanced at his wrist. One tap there. It would mean wait. He extended his hand, palm down, offering the place without touching her. Alice used one finger to tap lightly against his wrist. Once, James stopped moving altogether. His eyes remained on hers. "Like that?" she asked. "Exactly like that." The exchange was simple, almost practical. Yet the stillness that followed held more than instruction. Alice withdrew her hand. Most people believe they help by speaking louder. Most people believe volume can repair any failure of attention. And diplomats believe silence is useful until someone else uses it first. She smiled faintly. "You speak from experience." "Several years of it." James turned toward the windows, though he kept his face angled so she could still follow him. "I was attached to British missions on the continent before my father died." Men whispered in corridors because they assumed secrecy belonged to whoever lowered his voice. "Did you listen? Professionally? Did you understand?" He looked back at her. "Not always." The answer came without wit. "I learned how to hear what men concealed. I did not learn how often silence is forced upon people who have no power to answer." Alice thought of Lady Muriel speaking behind green silk. Powerful people often call silence agreement. "My father did." James's expression changed, the restraint remaining but becoming more personal. He decided what everyone needed before asking what they wanted. Servants, tenants, family. If anyone objected, he called the decision duty. And you? I thought acting quickly made me different from him. Does it? He did not answer at once. I don't know. The honesty surprised her more than confidence would have done. Alice rested one hand on the gallery table. Belief can become another form of control. James watched her carefully. Explain. A person may believe me and still decide that belief gives him the right to act in my name, to choose what evidence I should surrender, to decide where I should go, to protect me so thoroughly that my own judgment becomes unnecessary. You think I might do that. I think every powerful man might, especially when he believes his intentions are good. The words could have offended him. Instead, James lowered his gaze briefly, absorbing them. Then tell me when I cross that line. You may not enjoy hearing it. I would rather wait for your answer than hear 100 people speak for you. The sentence settled between them with such quiet force that Alice forgot the morning room, the callers, and the fatigue pressing behind her eyes. She looked at him fully. He had not spoken like a duke granting patience. He had spoken like a man asking to deserve trust. Neither of them noticed the narrow seam beneath the gallery skirting board, almost hidden by the runner's edge. Behind the wall, the silk-wrapped return pipe from Chair A continued into a service cabinet. Inside that cramped darkness, Simeon Frobisher held one end close and listened to James's words arrive, hollow but clear. By the 15th of May, handbills appeared at clubs, hotels, instrument shops, and fashionable drawing rooms across London. The bold heading announced a public lecture off Albemarle Street. The lowest whisper, 6 verified restorations. Beneath it, in smaller print, stood the name of the 6th success. Miss A. Copley, the woman who had written from Bloomsbury, received Alice in a rear drawing room, where the curtains were only half opened and every chair had been placed to face the windows. It was the 16th of May. A light rain had followed Alice's hired carriage from Mayfair, leaving the pavement dark and the wheels shining. But the journey itself had drawn no notice. Her elderly companion sat near the hearth. A maid remained within call. No member of House Thurlow had come. The former owner of the 6th chair was a widow in her late 50s, dressed with the careful elegance of someone determined not to appear vulnerable in her own home. She kept both hands folded around a lace handkerchief. I asked for you because you would understand what it is to be doubted while everyone insists they're helping. Alice took the chair opposite her. I will understand only what you choose to tell me. The widow's gaze moved briefly toward Alice's mouth, then returned to her eyes. Her hearing loss had not taken the same shape as Alice's, but she had learned to watch faces. Mr. Frobisher said, "The chair would preserve my independence. My nephews have begun to suggest that I should allow one of them to manage my allowance." Lady Muriel knew that. Did Lady Muriel recommend the apparatus? She recommended cooperation. The widow's fingers tightened around the handkerchief. Before the demonstration, Mr. Frobisher gave me a phrase. He told me to memorize it. When I felt 2 taps beneath my right hand, I was to repeat the phrase as if I had heard it. Alice kept her expression still. The admission confirmed what the pulses had suggested, yet triumph would have been an insult. What phrase did he give you? The garden gate is closed. Was it spoken behind the screen? Something was whispered. I could not distinguish it. When the chair tapped twice, I said what I had been taught. And the witnesses believed you had heard. They wanted to believe it. That made the deception easy. The widow looked down. I told Mr. Frobisher afterward that I would not do it again. He said the first demonstration had been imperfect because I was nervous. Lady Muriel said public confusion about my mind would be unfortunate at my age. Alice understood the threat without needing it explained. A woman declared confused might lose control of money, correspondence, and residence long before any court formally intervened. Did she say your nephews would hear of it? She did not need to. She said they were already concerned. The widow's mouth trembled once, then steadied. I returned the chair. My nephew wrote that it was unsuitable. He believed I was ashamed because it had failed. I let him believe that because the truth seemed worse. You were coerced. I agreed to the first false answer under pressure designed to make refusal dangerous. The widow studied her. You are kinder to me than I have been to myself. Kindness does not erase responsibility. It only places responsibility where it belongs. Alice glanced toward the folded writing paper on the small table. Mr. Frobisher is claiming 6 verified restorations. He has named me as the 6th without consent. Your chair may show how the demonstrations were arranged. Fear passed over the widow's face. You want me to testify? No, I want to know whether you wish to. I cannot stand before a room. Then you will not. The answer came without hesitation. I will not purchase my reputation with yours. The widow's eyes filled, though no tears fell. There is a statement in my desk. I wrote it after the chair was removed. I could give it to you under seal. Only under conditions you choose. It must not be opened unless I agree, or unless Mr. Frobisher publicly calls me dishonest. Then those conditions will be written on the outer wrapper. The widow released a breath that seemed to have been held for months. The chair is still mine in law. My nephew arranged its return, but Mr. Frobisher never collected it. It has remained in the storage room behind the kitchen passage. Alice looked toward her companion, who had followed the exchange closely. Would you permit it to be moved to a neutral cabinet maker, not to Norchester House? No, and not to Mr. Frobisher's workshop. No, then yes. The transfer took the remainder of the afternoon. A respectable carrier arrived with 2 men and a covered wagon. Before the chair left the townhouse, the widow, Alice's companion, and the carrier inspected its condition. Plum upholstery, walnut arms, brass fittings, no visible tears. The chair was wrapped in stout canvas. Cord was tied around the covering, and sealing wax was pressed over every knot so that the wrapper could not be opened without leaving evidence. The widow placed her seal beside the carrier's mark. Alice did not place her own seal upon it. The chair was not hers, and she would not blur that fact. A receipt named the neutral cabinet maker in Clerkenwell as custodian. 1 copy remained with the widow. 1 travelled with the carrier. A 3rd was placed inside the sealed packet for James's solicitor. Alice watched from the doorway as the covered shape was carried into the rain. For the first time, the 6th chair had a location that could not be denied, and a history that did not depend upon Frobisher's account. 3 days later, Alice stood in the morning room at Norchester House with the sealed statement in her reticule and the carrier's receipt in James's hand. He read the conditions written across the wrapper but did not ask to open it. She is willing to let the chair be examined, Alice said. She is not willing to be exposed. Then she will not be, even if her statement could settle the matter quickly. James lifted his eyes to hers. Especially then, a convenient truth can still be taken without consent. Alice had expected agreement. She had not expected the words to mirror the boundary she had tried to teach him in the West Gallery. Chair B is now at the Clerkenwell workshop, she said. The wrapping is sealed at every knot. The owner, my companion, and the carrier signed the transfer. My solicitor will record the custody and leave the chair untouched until you decide the next step. Until the owner and I decide. Until the owner and you decide, he corrected. There was no injury in the correction, only care. A footman entered with a bundle of printed handbills collected from a club in St. James's. The heading was already familiar, but the distribution had widened. Hotels, instrument dealers, lending libraries, and drawing rooms had received copies. The lecture would be held off Albemarle Street on the 22nd of May. Beneath the bold promise of 6 restorations, Alice's full surname now appeared. James read it, and the restraint in his face became colder. I can prevent the room from being hired. Then he will say rank silenced him because his claims threatened you. I can prevent the use of your name. He has already used it. Alice set the handbill on the table. A private prohibition will not correct a public claim. You mean to attend? Yes, he intends to force you into another demonstration. Then he will have to do so before witnesses after I refuse. James walked to the window, then turned back so that his face remained visible. What do you need from me? The question mattered more because power gave him so many easier ones. Where shall I take you? Whom shall I remove? What shall I command? He asked what she needed. I need you in the room, Alice said. Not as his patron, not as my rescuer, as someone who heard me say no the first time. Where in the room? She understood the second question as well. He was asking how near he might stand. Not at my elbow unless I ask. James absorbed that without protest. Then I will remain where you can see me. And if I choose to leave, I will not stop you. If I choose to stay after you think it is dangerous. A pause followed. It was brief but honest. I will tell you what I fear. Then I will wait for your answer. Alice looked at him across the morning room, at the man who could close doors with a word and was learning instead to leave them open. That will do. On the 20th of May, Lady Muriel's note arrived. It requested that Alice attend the Albemarle Street lecture to correct what she called an unfortunate misunderstanding. The final line was written in Lady Muriel's own hand. A reasonable woman would not sacrifice a charitable work merely to defend her pride. Alice folded the note and placed it beside the handbill. Then she opened her reticule and touched the closed black leather case within it. She would attend. She would not sit unless she chose. She would not repeat words she had not heard, and this time, when the room tried to decide what her silence meant, she would answer before anyone else could speak for her. On the 22nd of May, the hired lecture room off Albemarle Street filled before the appointed hour. Physicians stood beside instrument dealers. Aristocratic patrons occupied the front rows. Curious ladies held printed handbills across their laps, while gentlemen examined the elevated platform as though respectability could be measured by polished wood and green silk. Alice entered with her elderly companion and felt the room turn toward her before she could identify a single face. She wore a plain grey dress, chosen because no one could honestly call it theatrical. The black leather tuning fork case remained closed inside her reticule. She had not come to perform. She had come to deny that any performance had cured her. James stood near the side wall where she could see him without searching. He did not approach. That had been her condition. When their eyes met, he inclined his head once. The gesture said he was present, nothing more. On the platforms stood another whispering chair, Chair C, upholstered in dark red instead of plum. A green silk screen had been fixed behind it. To the right, a tall pier glass reflected the room in narrow fragments. Alice noticed the mirror because its angle caught the platform, the screen, and the place where a speaker might stand behind her. Simeon Frobisher opened the lecture with the confidence of a man who had invited witnesses because he believed he controlled what they would witness. Ladies and gentlemen, our work has been injured by misunderstanding. Today we shall correct it. Lady Muriel sat beside the subscription committee, dressed in black silk trimmed with silver braid. Mourning colours gave her severity the appearance of virtue. Miss Copley has experienced anxiety concerning the publicity surrounding her progress, she said. We must be compassionate toward disappointment. Alice stepped forward before the phrasing could settle into accepted truth. She faced the room, waited until the nearest conversations ceased, and unfolded the statement she had prepared. I have not experienced progress through Mr. Frobisher's apparatus. I did not authorize the use of my name. I cannot hear a whisper spoken behind me, and I will not allow a physical vibration to be described as language. Frobisher moved closer to the front of the platform. No one disputes that Miss Copley's condition is unusual. We dispute only her interpretation of what occurred. My interpretation is that I did not hear, and yet you reacted at precisely the correct moment. I reacted to movement beneath my hand. A murmur passed through the audience. Alice caught only pieces from moving mouths. One physician leaned toward another. A woman in the second row looked at James, then at Alice, as if the Duke's presence were part of the evidence. Frobisher smiled with measured regret. Miss Copley, I ask for one final demonstration. Sit in the chair. If you hear nothing, you lose nothing. I lose the right to refuse when you present refusal as guilt. Then remain standing. I shall speak only one phrase. I have already said no. Lady Muriel rose. Surely a woman certain of her own truth has no reason to fear a whisper. Alice turned until she could see her clearly. Certainty does not require obedience. The words drew several lowered glances. Not shame, discomfort. Frobisher stepped behind the green screen before anyone could object. Alice remained beside the chair, facing the audience. The pier glass stood to her left. In its reflection, she saw the upper edge of the screen, and, beyond it, the lower half of Frobisher's face, where the silk failed to meet a decorative panel. His lips moved. I would rather wait for your answer. Alice's breath caught. The sentence did not reach her as sound. It reached her through memory. James had spoken those words in the West Gallery. No patron had been near enough to hear. No one except Alice had stood before him. She turned sharply toward the mirror, searching the reflected mouth. Frobisher emerged at once. You see, he announced. She heard me. The room shifted, chairs scraped. A subscription pencil fell and rolled beneath a bench. Alice looked toward James. His face had gone still with recognition. Frobisher continued before she could explain. Miss Copley responded to a whisper spoken behind a screen. Her reaction was immediate and exact. I saw your lips in the mirror, Alice said. He glanced toward the pier glass as though noticing it for the first time. A convenient explanation. You used words spoken privately at Norchester House. Lady Muriel lifted her chin. Perhaps His Grace has discussed the matter more widely than you understood. Several heads turned toward James. The insinuation moved quickly because society always preferred romance to machinery. Frobisher lowered his voice, though Alice saw the words clearly. Miss Copley has built a profession upon partial hearing. A public cure would make that profession less necessary. It would also make certain sympathetic attentions less remarkable. The cruelty lay in its polish. He did not call her dishonest outright. He invited the room to complete the accusation. A gentleman near the aisle folded his handbill. A woman who had once asked about lessons for her sister avoided Alice's eyes. James stepped forward, stopping several feet from her. "Miss Copley never consented to this demonstration," he said. "The phrase was stolen from a private conversation." "Your Grace's concern is admirable," Frobisher replied. "It is also personal enough to trouble the impartial observer. My concern does not alter whether she heard." "Then let us remove Miss Copley from the question." Frobisher turned toward the side door. "Bring in Mr. Bell." A thin young man entered, dressed in a dark coat and carrying himself with rehearsed modesty. He sat in chair C. Frobisher placed him behind the green screen, then returned to the lever near the rear leg. Alice saw the young man's right hand settle on the armrest. Frobisher whispered from behind the silk. 2 faint movements passed through the chair. Alice could not feel them from where she stood, but she saw the sitter's fingers tighten in time. "The roses bloom beneath the window," the young man said. Frobisher came around the screen, precisely correct. Approval stirred through the room. The assistant had not hesitated. That was the problem. No one who struggled to identify uncertain speech answered with such polished certainty. Alice looked at his face. He did not appear triumphant. He appeared frightened. Frobisher faced the audience. "We have now seen one subject respond and another deny her own response. The apparatus cannot be blamed for pride." James moved again, anger sharpening his restraint. "You will not call her dishonest." Alice placed one finger on the small table beside her and tapped once. The movement was barely audible, but James saw it. He stopped immediately. The room noticed that too. Alice turned toward the audience. "Mr. Frobisher has mistaken my reaction for his proof and my silence for his permission." Her voice did not rise. "I saw his mouth in the glass. I did not hear his whisper." He repeated a sentence that belonged to a private conversation, then used my surprise as evidence against me. If that is his method, I will not assist it by remaining in his chair, his lecture, or his story. Lady Muriel spoke from the front row. "Leaving now will look like surrender." Alice met her gaze. "Only to those who believe a woman must stay where she is insulted in order to prove she has dignity." She folded her statement and stepped down from the platform. James moved beside her, not ahead. He did not touch her. The audience separated slowly, less from courtesy than uncertainty. At the top of the stairs, Alice paused. The noise, movement, and strain of following faces had left her unsteady. James held his hand near her elbow without making contact. He waited. Alice looked at him and gave one small nod. His fingers rested lightly beneath her arm. The touch steadied without claiming. They descended together. In the entrance hall, her companion went to summon the hired carriage. James remained where Alice could see him. "He heard us in the West Gallery," he said. "Through the return pipe," Alice answered. "The phrase proves it." And the assistant knew his answer before he sat down. "Yes." James looked toward the closed lecture room doors. "Chair A is still connected to that wall at Norchester House." Alice saw the decision form before he spoke it. She should have recognized the danger in the speed of it. "I will have it open tonight," he said. "Every piece will be laid bare before dawn. By 8 o'clock on the morning of the 23rd of May, the whispering chair at Norchester House no longer resembled a chair. Its plum upholstery lay folded across a worktable. The walnut arms had been removed and placed beside lengths of silk-wrapped tubing, a narrow brass strip, a foot treadle rod, and several screws arranged in shallow porcelain dishes. The green screen had been taken down. The opening beneath the skirting board stood exposed, revealing the passage where the return pipe had crossed into the west gallery wall. James had remained in the winter garden through most of the night while the cabinet maker worked. He had believed that speed would preserve truth before Frobisher could alter anything. By morning, every hidden part had been revealed. By morning, he also understood that he had revealed it badly. Alice entered with her elderly companion and stopped just inside the doorway. She had expected an inspection. She had not expected wreckage. James stood near the dismantled frame, his coat changed, but his face marked by sleeplessness. He stepped into her sightline before speaking. "Miss Copley." She looked past him at the pieces. "You opened it?" "Yes." "Who witnessed the first cut?" The cabinet maker lowered his tools. A clerk from James's solicitor stood near the table with several pages of notes. But Alice saw the answer before either man gave it. James did not look away. "The cabinet maker, my household steward, and I were present." "Your steward serves you?" "Yes." "Your cabinet maker was retained by you?" "Yes." "And your solicitor's clerk arrived after the upholstery had already been removed?" The clerk shifted uncomfortably. James answered for him. "He did." Alice approached the work table without touching anything. Inside the right walnut arm lay a brass strip narrow enough to fit beneath the polished surface. A rod connected it to the foot treadle. The silk-wrapped tube passed through the chair, back, and toward the wall. Beside it rested another hollow line angled toward the headrest. Everything she and James had suspected was there. The evidence should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt compromised. "You found the cue mechanism," she said. "We did. The treadle strikes the brass strip twice. The speaking tube carries sound toward the sitter. The second line runs back through the wall toward the service cabinet. Then you were right to suspect the apparatus. We were right and wrong in the way you proved it." James's jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but at the truth of the words. Before he could answer, a footman entered with a card and a sealed letter. The card belonged to a solicitor representing Simeon Frobisher. James opened the letter, read it once, and handed it to Alice. The solicitor objected to any claim based upon Chair A. His client had not been notified before dismantling. No independent witness had observed the apparatus in its intact state. Any rod, tube, strip, or alteration now displayed could have been added after the chair left Frobisher's control. The letter concluded that the Duke of Norchester's personal attachment to Miss Copley made the supposed discovery especially unreliable. Alice returned the page. "He has found the weakness already." "Yes." "Because it is real." "Yes." There was no defense in James's reply, but the absence of defense did not lessen what had been done. Alice looked again at the opened arm. Chair A might have shown how the private phrase was stolen. It might have shown how the double tap was made. Now it shows only what was present after a duke ordered his own servants to tear it apart. I acted before Frobisher could remove the mechanism. You acted before anyone else could verify that he had not. I know. Do you? Her voice remained low, but the restraint cost her. You believed me, Your Grace. Then you acted as though belief gave you ownership of the truth. The words struck harder than anger would have. James stood motionless. Alice continued. You did not ask whether I wanted the chair opened. You did not ask the widow who owns Chair B whether haste would endanger her evidence. You did not wait for neutral custody. You decided that because your purpose was protection, your method could not harm me. That is exactly what I did. The answer stopped her. James looked at the dismantled frame, then back at her. I was angry. Frobisher used a private sentence to shame you before a room, and I wanted the instrument opened before another hour passed. I told myself urgency was discipline. It was not. I compromised the evidence, and I repeated the very pattern you warned me against. Alice's fingers curled against her skirt. You could say you were protecting me. I was. That does not excuse it. Most men would believe it did. Then most men would be wrong. He did not step closer. He did not ask her to understand his fear or forgive his intention. I am sorry, Mr. Copley. I will not ask you to ease the consequence for me. The apology did not repair the chair. It did something more difficult. It left the harm named without demanding that she comfort the man who had caused it. Alice turned toward the clerk. Chair A must be sealed exactly as it stands now. Every separate piece listed. Every person present last night named. The time of each removal recorded as accurately as memory permits. James nodded to the clerk. Do it. Alice faced him again. Chair B remains in Clerkenwell under neutral custody. Agreed. No one from House Thurlow touches its internal mechanism. Not you. Not Lady Muriel. Not a servant acting under your orders. Agreed. The owner retains authority over her statement and over any use of her name. Yes. I write the conditions of any final examination. Yes. You speak after me, not before me. A faint pain crossed his face, but he accepted it without hesitation. After you. And there will be no courtship, engagement, or public gesture offered as protection from scandal. This time the silence lasted longer. Alice saw him understand that she had named something neither of them had openly admitted. The attachment between them existed. So did the temptation to use his rank as shelter. I will not offer marriage as a shield, he said, nor affection as payment for trust. Good. Is there anything else? Yes. When you disagree with my method, you tell me. You do not replace it. I give you my word. Alice looked at the dismantled chair. Your word will matter when your actions resemble it. James lowered his head. That is fair. Over the next 2 days, the consequences widened. 2 pupils postponed Alice's lessons. A newspaper repeated the suggestion that she had reacted to a whisper and then denied it. Frobisher announced that ducal hostility had forced him to defend a charitable enterprise against private influence. Lady Muriel withdrew to her rooms and sent no apology. On the afternoon of the 25th, a messenger delivered a thick envelope to Alice's Bloomsbury residence. The outer sheet bore Lady Muriel's hand. Inside waited an offer drafted with polished generosity. Alice would receive an income for life, a furnished residence on the continent, and written assurance that all public allegations against her would cease. In return, she must leave England within 6 weeks, abandon her objections to the whispering chair, and make no further statement concerning Frobisher's demonstrations. Her elderly companion read the terms and whispered, "It is enough to make you secure." Alice watched the woman's mouth and answered, "It is enough to make me disappear." She did not open the enclosed settlement deed. She returned it to the envelope, sealed the outer fold, and wrote across it, "Declined unread." When James received the packet that evening, he did not send another offer. He sent only a copy of the latest custody notice from Clerkenwell. The seals on Chair B remained unbroken. The cabinet maker had weighed it against an ordinary chair of comparable size. It was heavier by nearly 2 stone. At the bottom of the page, James had written one sentence in his own hand. "I will wait for your method." Alice folded the notice and placed it beside the locked drawer, containing the original prospectus. For the first time since the lecture, her anger did not lessen, but it changed shape. Chair A had been lost as clean proof. Chair B had not, and this time no Duke would open it until she decided how the truth should emerge. On the 26th of May, Alice arrived at the Clerkenwell workshop shortly after 10, carrying the black leather tuning fork case in her reticule and a written list of conditions in her hand. The street outside smelled of rain-dark brick, coal smoke, and fresh-cut wood. Inside, the neutral cabinet maker had cleared the center of his largest workroom. Chair B stood upon a raised platform beneath the north windows, still wrapped in stout canvas. Every cord remained tight. Each seal lay unbroken across its knot. Alice's elderly companion sat near the door. James's solicitor stood beside a narrow table with paper, ink, and a watch. The cabinet maker waited with his tools laid out but untouched. James was not in the room. He had obeyed her condition. The solicitor read the transfer receipt aloud. The widow's seal, the carrier's mark, and the companion's signature matched the records made in Bloomsbury. The cabinet maker examined each wax impression under a magnifying lens, then looked toward Alice. "No knot has been opened, Miss Copley. Record that before the covering is removed." The solicitor did so. Only then did the cabinet maker cut the outer cord beside the seals rather than through them. The canvas came away in one piece. Chair B emerged intact. Its plum upholstery was slightly faded at the seat, but there were no tears, fresh nails, or disturbed seams. The walnut arms retained their original polish. Alice walked around it without touching. "Has anyone operated the mechanism since the chair entered your custody?" "No," the cabinet maker answered. "I weighed it, as instructed, without opening or engaging it. And the difference? Nearly 2 stone heavier than an ordinary upholstered chair of the same size." Alice glanced toward the solicitor. His pen moved at once. "There is a manufacturer's plate beneath the rear rail," the cabinet maker continued. "It can be opened with 2 screws. Doing so will not disturb the upholstery or disconnect the mechanism." "Will the position of the screws show whether they have been moved before?" "Not certainly. They have been turned at some time, but that may have occurred during construction." Alice considered the risk. "Open only the plate, nothing else." The cabinet maker knelt. Before touching the first screw, he marked its position on paper and asked the solicitor to note the time. The brass plate lifted after several careful turns, revealing a dark cavity within the chair frame. No part was removed, no wire was cut. The cabinet maker angled a small mirror toward the opening. "There is more than one channel inside," he said. Alice opened the black leather case and removed the steel tuning fork. The engraving, WC2AC, 1855, caught the workshop light. She struck one prong against the padded block inside the case and placed the stem against the back rail. A weak tremor traveled through the wood. She moved it to the left arm. The vibration remained faint. At the right arm, the response changed. A clear pulse passed beneath her fingers, followed by a second, as though a narrow piece of metal inside had carried the movement farther than the wood alone should have done. "Record the position," she said. The solicitor noted it. Alice struck the fork again and tested the lower frame. A second resonance answered near the front right leg. It did not match the path toward the speaking tube at the chair back. "2 roots," she said. The cabinet maker looked through the access opening again. "I believe you are right. One hollow line runs upward toward the headrest. Another mechanism travels along the arm and down toward the treadle." He adjusted the mirror. a narrow strip of brass became visible, fixed beneath the walnut arm. Stamped into its surface were 2 characters and a number. F-17, he read. The solicitor repeated it while writing. Alice did not allow herself relief. A marking linked the strip to Frobisher's manufacture. But the chair still had to prove what the strip did. Can the treadle be operated without opening the chair? Yes, it remains connected. Then no one operates it yet. She moved behind the chair and examined the tube emerging near the headrest. A second narrow pipe continued downward through the frame to a removable floor connector. Could this carry sound away from the sitter? She asked. A pipe carries in whichever direction a voice enters. The cabinet maker said, but we should demonstrate it rather than assume. A hearing witness had been arranged for that purpose. An elderly clerk employed by the solicitor, sir, and unknown to Frobisher. He entered only after the chair and access plate had been examined. The cabinet maker connected the return pipe to a short length of matching tube that led behind a partition. The clerk stood there out of sight. Alice sat in chair B, but did not place her hands upon the arms. Her companion remained visible. Say an ordinary sentence, Alice told the solicitor. He leaned near the chair without speaking into the main tube. The workshop clock is slow, he said. Alice understood only because she faced him and watched his mouth. Behind the partition, the clerk repeated, the workshop clock is slow. The words had travelled away from the chair through the return pipe. Alice asked the clerk to speak next. His voice entered the far end. The solicitor, standing beside the headrest, repeated the sentence accurately. Alice herself heard only a dim blur and no dependable words. The pipe had no loyalty, just as James had said. It carried conversation in both directions. The private phrase in the West Gallery had not been guessed. Frobisher had listened through chair A. The realization brought no embarrassment now. It brought anger, sharpened into method. He had stolen a sentence about waiting for her answer, then used it to deny that her answer mattered. We have the path, Alice said. Now we must prove the cue. The cabinet maker pointed toward the brass strip. If the treadle strikes it, the sitter will feel the signal through the arm. But feeling the signal does not explain how the sitter knows what phrase to repeat. The solicitor looked at her. The widow's statement explains that. It explains what happened to her. I will not make her private fear the foundation of public proof if the apparatus can condemn itself. Alice walked to the writing table and drew a clean sheet toward her. Mr. Frobisher relies upon a prepared answer. Then the answer must be separated from the actual phrase. She wrote while speaking. 4 ordinary sentences, each written on a separate card, each folded and sealed. One card drawn only after Mr. Frobisher and his assistant are placed where they cannot see or hear the selection. The solicitor followed her reasoning. A neutral reader whispers the chosen phrase through the speaking tube. Yes, the assistant sits in the chair. If the apparatus truly carries language, he repeats the selected phrase. If the double tap merely tells him when to speak, he will repeat whatever Mr. Frobisher taught him in advance. The cabinet maker glanced at the treadle, and the chair remains closed until after the answer. Exactly. No one can claim we altered the mechanism before it was tested. What of your own part? The solicitor asked. Alice looked at chair B. I sit first. The room sees that I detect the vibration and cannot identify the words. Then a hearing witness sits and proves the speaking tube carries actual speech to an ordinary ear. Only after that does Mr. Frobisher's assistant take the chair. She added one final condition. The assistant must be separated before the card is drawn. The plan occupied less than a page. Its strength came from what it did not require: no confession, no exposed widow, no appeal to James's rank. The chair would produce either the selected phrase or the fraud. When every observation had been recorded, Alice replaced the tuning fork inside its case and closed the clasp. She then crossed to the workshop door. James waited in the outer office, hat in hand, exactly where he had promised to remain. He did not ask what they had found. He did not attempt to read the solicitor's notes over her shoulder. Alice opened the door wider. "You may come in now, Your Grace." His eyes met hers, and something quiet passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. An invitation earned by restraint. James entered and stopped beside the door until Alice faced him fully. "The chair contains two separate paths," she said. "One carries speech. One carries a cue. The return pipe works in both directions. That is how Mr. Frobisher heard us in the West Gallery." James's expression hardened, but he did not interrupt. Alice continued. "The brass strip is stamped F-17. We have not removed it. We have not opened the upholstery. We can prove the scheme without using the widow's name." "How?" he asked. Alice placed her written plan on the table. 4 phrases, 1 sealed choice. One answer Mr. Frobisher cannot prepare. James read the page, then looked at her instead of the chair. "It is cleaner than anything I would have devised. That is why you waited outside." A flicker of humility crossed his face. "Yes." Alice rested one hand on the back of chair B, feeling only still wood beneath her palm. "Now we can prove what the chair does without asking any woman to surrender what happened to her." Before James could answer, a messenger entered from the outer office carrying a travel-stained leather case. Behind him stood a silver-haired physician who had arrived that morning by railway from Lewes. Dr. Owen Latham looked from Alice's face to the black case on the table. "William Copley's fork," he said softly. "I would know that engraving anywhere." Dr. Owen Latham did not reach for the tuning fork. He waited until Alice lifted the black leather case from the table and opened it herself. The steel prongs lay against the worn lining, and the engraving caught the workshop light. "WC to AC, 1855. Your father ordered that engraving from a surgical instrument maker in Lewes," he said. He argued with the man for half an hour because the letters were too shallow. Alice looked at him. "You remember that?" "I remember William Copley whenever someone mistakes certainty for wisdom." He set his travel-stained case on the solicitor's table and opened it. Inside lay a narrow daybook bound in cracked brown calf. The pages had yellowed, but the ink remained dark. Dr. Latham turned carefully through entries marked by dates until he found one from September 1855. He did not hand the book to Alice. It belonged to him, and the custody mattered now. Instead, he angled it so she and the solicitor could see while he read. "Miss Alice Copley, aged 15, recovering after scarlet fever. Detects vibration of steel fork through table and bed frame. Cannot identify whispered words when speaker stands behind or beyond sight. Distinguishes some lower speech at close distance when the face is visible." Alice had known the facts all her adult life. Seeing them in another man's handwriting still tightened her throat. Her father had not imagined her condition. She had not shaped it years later to suit a profession. The distinction had been recorded before Simeon Frobisher placed a silk screen behind her chair. "Did my father believe the loss would improve?" she asked. Dr. Latham's eyes softened. He hoped. He did not promise. He was very careful about promises. James had remained near the workshop door, speaking only when Alice invited him. Now he asked, "Will you testify to what you observed?" Latham looked at him directly. "I will testify to what I observed and nothing more. I will not diagnose a mechanism I have not examined. I will not say, 'Miss Copley hears nothing,' because that is not true. I will say she could feel vibration without understanding whispered language in 1855, and that the pattern she describes today is consistent with what I recorded." "That is all I need," Alice said. "It is all truth permits," Latham replied. The solicitor copied the relevant entry while Latham kept the daybook in his own possession. When the copy was finished, Alice closed the tuning fork case and returned it to her reticule. Chair B remained on the workshop platform, its access plate replaced and its seals newly documented. No one touched the internal mechanism. By the 1st of June, the subscription board had learned enough to become frightened of public inquiry. 3 trustees met Alice at Norchester House in the morning room, where the doors remained open and her elderly companion sat within sight. James stood near the windows, but did not lead the discussion. The senior trustee, a grey-haired baronet with careful manners, offered what he called a humane resolution. The board would withdraw every suggestion that Alice had pretended deafness. A written correction would be sent privately to her former pupils and to the editors who had printed Frobisher's claims. In return, there would be no public demonstration and no further accusation against Lady Muriel. Mr. Frobisher's venture would end quietly, the baronet said. Subscriptions could be returned without spectacle. Alice watched his mouth, and what explanation would be given to those who bought chairs? That the enterprise proved impractical, not fraudulent. His gaze shifted. That word carries consequences beyond our authority. The consequences already exist. You are asking me to accept correction where few people can see it, while the false claim was printed for all London. Another trustee leaned forward. "Miss Copley, surely your first concern is your reputation." "My first concern is that no other woman be taught a phrase, tapped twice, and displayed as a cure. A public test may expose you to further ridicule. So did your private endorsement." The senior trustee glanced toward James, perhaps expecting rank to soften her. James did not intervene. Alice continued, "If I accept a private correction, Mr. Frobisher can say the board yielded to a duke's influence. Lady Muriel can call it family peace. The apparatus remains misunderstood, and every person coerced into answering remains alone." The baronet folded his gloves. "Then you insist upon a hearing?" Alice felt the answer before she gave it. Fear sat beneath her ribs. The thought of another room watching her fail to hear made her palms cold. "I choose one," she said, "under written rules, with neutral custody, with the chair intact until the spoken test is complete." The trustees withdrew to confer with the solicitor. James waited until the room had emptied except for Alice, her companion, and a maid arranging untouched tea. He moved into Alice's sightline, but kept several feet between them. "You do not owe them another performance," he said. "My belief does not depend upon that room. I know, then I must tell you what I fear." She remembered the condition she had given him. "Tell me, do not replace my method. Tell me. If the test fails because Frobisher changes his method, society will not blame the mechanism. It will blame you. You may lose more pupils. You may be called ambitious, deceitful, or worse. Every instinct I possess tells me to remove you from that danger. And what will you do with that instinct?" Nothing without your answer. James looked toward the closed door through which the trustees had departed. I am afraid that my rank has already made the truth look private. I am afraid that if the room turns cruel again, I will forget patience and become the man who opened chair A. Alice's anger had not vanished, neither had memory, yet his restraint was no longer a promise. It had become behavior at the workshop, in the board meeting, and now in this room. I am afraid too, she said. Not that I will fail to hear. I know I will. I am afraid they will make my failure into entertainment again. Then stop it with one tap. I may. And if you choose to continue, you will wait. I will. Alice looked down at her hands. I am not choosing the hearing because I feel no fear. I am choosing it because fear should not decide who owns the truth. When she raised her eyes, James's expression held something more vulnerable than admiration. He took one step closer, then stopped. May I hold you? He did not open his arms until she answered. Alice stepped toward him before he moved again. The embrace was not sudden. It was careful, almost solemn, and then it became real. James's arms settled around her without tightening beyond what she returned. Alice placed her cheek against his chest. She could not hear his heartbeat as another woman might have done. She felt it through cloth and bone, steady beneath her skin. For several breaths, she allowed herself to remain there. She was not evidence. She was not a subject. She was a woman accepting comfort from a man who had finally learned to ask. Her arms closed more firmly around him. James released her only when she began to move. He did not kiss her. He did not turn tenderness into a claim. Thank you, he said, for asking, for answering. On the 3rd of June, a sealed note arrived from the widow in Bloomsbury. She granted permission for her written statement to be opened only if Frobisher publicly attacked her honesty or denied that any subject had been coached. The original statement remained sealed with James's solicitor. That same afternoon, the subscription board accepted Alice's conditions. The public hearing would take place on the 12th of June in the Albemarle Street lecture room. Frobisher agreed to attend. He added one condition of his own. His usual assistant would sit in chair B. On the 4th of June, Alice sat at the long writing table in James's morning room with the solicitor on her left, her elderly companion near the open door, and 8 blank cards arranged before her. Chair B remained under neutral seal in Clerkenwell. Dr. Latham's daybook had returned to his keeping until the hearing. The original prospectus naming Miss A.C. remained secured in Alice's locked drawer, and the widow's statement stood sealed with the solicitor. Nothing important had changed hands without a record. That mattered now. 4 phrases, Alice said. Ordinary enough that no one can guess them from the subject of the hearing. The solicitor nodded, and written only after Mr. Frobisher confirms that his assistant has entered the waiting room. Yes, each card folded, sealed, and signed across the fold, one drawn by a trustee. No member of House Thurlow touches the box. James stood at the far end of the table, close enough to follow, but not close enough to direct. Including me, he said. Alice looked at him. Especially you. Agreed. The solicitor wrote the condition. Alice continued. The neutral reader whispers the selected phrase. Mr. Frobisher may not stand behind the chair. He may not touch the treadle, the arm, the tube, or the screen before the sitter answers. And if he claims the apparatus requires adjustment, James asked. Then the request is recorded. No adjustment occurs until I have answered, a hearing witness has answered, and his assistant has answered. You sit first, the solicitor asked. I do. I will state what I feel and what I do not understand. Then A hearing witness proves that the speaking tube can carry actual words to an ordinary ear. Only after that does the assistant sit. The solicitor lifted his pen. Your stop signal, one tap on the table. If I use it, all speech and movement stop. James met her eyes. Immediately. Alice added the final condition herself. Miss Copley speaks before the Duke of Norchester. His Grace may address the room only after she has concluded. The solicitor looked toward James. Your Grace? Write it exactly. James took a separate sheet from the table. It contained the statement his solicitor had prepared concerning Chair A. He read it once, then signed his full name beneath the admission that he had ordered the chair dismantled before neutral witnesses were present, and that no component discovered afterward could be treated as untouched evidence. His signature was steady. The statement would injure his position and strengthen Alice's method. He signed it without qualification. When the solicitor left to prepare formal copies, Alice remained at the table. James did not ask whether the signature had earned anything. You have given Frobisher a weapon, she said. It was already his. Hiding it would only sharpen it. You could have described the decision as an error made in good faith. Good faith did not preserve the chair. Alice folded the rules. No, it did not. Before James could answer, a footman announced Lady Muriel. She entered with an older married cousin as chaperone, though propriety did nothing to soften her purpose. Her gown was dove grey, severe enough to suggest injury and expensive enough to deny defeat. She waited until James had withdrawn to the adjoining library at Alice's request. Then she placed a narrow leather portfolio on the table. You have made your point, Miss Copley. The hearing has not taken place. It need not. Lady Muriel opened the portfolio. Inside lay letters from 2 former pupils, an offer of an annual allowance, and invitations from women who had recently ceased receiving Alice. I can restore what this unpleasantness has cost you. Your pupils will return. Your income will be secure. No hostess in London will question your honesty. Alice did not touch the papers. And in exchange, you withdraw from the hearing. You state that Mr. Frobisher's apparatus was misunderstood rather than fraudulent. The board ends the venture quietly. And the women who were coached, no names need be spoken. That is not what I asked. Lady Muriel's expression chilled. You have become very confident under my nephew's protection. His protection did not design the test. His affection may have done more than you admit. The older cousin shifted, but Lady Muriel continued. James is fascinated because you require special patience. He won't always find waiting romantic. Men of his rank are accustomed to being obeyed before they finish speaking. Alice looked toward the open library door. James remained out of sight. He had not entered to defend her. He was honoring the boundary she had set. His willingness to wait is precisely why I trust him, she said. Trust is not marriage. No, nor is rank. Lady Muriel pushed the portfolio closer. Think carefully. A public hearing may clear your name, or it may make you a permanent curiosity. This offer gives you peace. Peace purchased by silence is only another room with a screen behind my chair. Alice closed the portfolio and returned it. I will attend the hearing. Lady Muriel's composure fractured for a breath. Then whatever follows is your choice. Yes, Alice said. At last, it is. On the 8th of June, the final copies of the rules were signed at Norchester House. Chair B had been transferred from Clerkenwell to the Albemarle Street lecture room under the solicitor's seal. The carrier's receipt named the hour of departure, the hour of arrival, and every person who had witnessed the move. The apparatus remained closed. Late that afternoon, Alice crossed the conservatory while her companion waited in the morning room beyond the open doors. James stood among the palms with no one else close enough to interrupt. He moved into her line of sight. "Lady Muriel has left Norchester House," he said. "She will stay with her cousin until the hearing." "Did she tell you what she offered me?" "No. Pupils, income, social acceptance. In exchange for silence." "Yes." James's face hardened, but he did not speak for her. Alice stopped beside a stone planter. "You once said you would rather wait for my answer." "I meant it, even when the answer is difficult." "Especially then," he drew a breath. "What I feel for you is not gratitude. It is not pity. And it is not the instinct to protect you from a room. I know that because when I imagine the hearing ended, with no danger left to fight, I still want your company. I still want your judgment. I still want to be the man you look for when you enter a crowded room." Alice's pulse changed. He did not move closer. He waited, just as he had promised. She raised one hand and placed her palm against his cheek. The touch was hers to begin. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and the restraint in him became visible rather than distant. "You may ask me now," she said. James did not cover her hand or close the space between them. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." Alice stepped closer. His hand settled lightly at her waist, only after she closed the distance. The kiss was slow and careful, but not uncertain. She answered it fully, lifting her face and allowing the tenderness she had held behind discipline to become unmistakable. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. For several breaths, neither spoke. The open doors remained behind them. Her companion was nearby. Nothing about the moment belonged to secrecy or coercion. Alice opened her eyes. "At the hearing, you speak last." A quiet smile touched his mouth. "After you, every word." The following morning, in the lecture room, the solicitor wrote 4 phrases while Frobisher watched from across the chamber. Each card was folded, sealed, and signed across the fold before being placed inside the locked box. The solicitor sealed the 4th card last. Frobisher's eyes never left his hands, but the paper remained turned away. He saw the wax. He saw the signature. He did not see the phrase. On the 12th of June, the Albemarle Street lecture room opened under the authority of the subscription board. Not Simeon Frobisher. That difference appeared in every detail. The doors were watched by the board's attendants. The green silk screen stood where Alice had approved it. Chair B rested upon the platform beneath an unbroken canvas cover, its cords still sealed with the marks of the widow, the carrier, the neutral cabinet maker, and the solicitor. Board trustees occupied the front row. Dr. Owen Latham sat with his brown calf daybook on his knees. Former purchasers, instrument makers, physicians, patrons, and newspaper men filled the remaining seats. Lady Muriel sat rigid in black silk. James stood against the side wall, exactly where Alice could see him. He had promised to speak last. Alice stepped before the room in a plain dove-grey gown and waited until every visible mouth had stopped moving. "I haven't come to prove that I hear," she said. "I have come to prove that Mr. Frobisher knew I did not." The solicitor called each witness named on the transfer receipt. One by one, they confirmed the chair's movement from Bloomsbury to Clerkenwell and then to Albemarle Street. The seals were examined and found intact. Only after the finding was written into the record did the cabinet maker cut the cords beside the wax impressions. The canvas fell away. Chair B remained unopened. Frobisher's assistant was taken to a separate waiting room. The door closed behind him. 4 folded cards were removed from the locked box and placed in a shallow silver bowl. Each bore the solicitor's signature across its seal. A trustee reached in, turned his face away, and drew the fourth card. He handed it unopened to the neutral reader, who broke the seal beneath the eyes of the board. Frobisher tried to lean forward. The solicitor blocked his view. Alice crossed to the chair. Her black leather case lay on a small table beside the platform. She did not open it yet. She sat, placed her right hand upon the walnut arm, and looked at the neutral reader. Proceed. He went behind the screen and whispered through the speaking tube. A faint blur of sound reached Alice, too soft and shapeless to become language. Then the chair gave two distinct pulses beneath her palm. She waited until they ceased. "What did you hear?" the senior trustee asked. "No words. What did you feel?" "Two taps through the right arm." "Can you repeat the phrase?" "No." Frobisher rose halfway from his chair. "Miss Copley's condition is not representative." Alice looked toward the table and tapped once. The room stopped. James did not move. The solicitor called the hearing witness from Clerkenwell, an elderly clerk unknown to Frobisher. He sat in chair B. The neutral reader whispered the same phrase through the tube. The clerk repeated at once, "The west window is open." The solicitor wrote the sentence but kept the drawn card face down. "The tube carries speech to an ordinary hearing ear," Alice said. "The taps carry only a signal." Frobisher's assistant was brought in. No one told him which card had been drawn. He sat in the chair with his right hand arranged upon the walnut arm. Frobisher was instructed to remain 6 feet away and not touch the chair, screen, tube, or treadle. The neutral reader whispered. The assistant stared ahead. Nothing happened. Seconds lengthened. His breathing became visible in the rise of his narrow shoulders. "The mechanism requires its customary adjustment," Frobisher said. "You agreed to no adjustment before an answer," the solicitor replied. "Without proper engagement, this isn't a fair test." "Then state what you intend to touch," Alice said. Frobisher stepped toward the chair. The board's attendant blocked him. His composure broke for the first time. "The foot regulator must be aligned." "From 6 feet away?" Alice asked. A few faces turned toward his shoes. Frobisher shifted his weight. The movement appeared accidental, but his right foot found a narrow extension concealed beneath the edge of the platform rug. He pressed. 2 sharp pulses traveled through the chair. The assistant's fingers tightened. "The rain has left the roses," he said. No one reacted at first. The sentence hung in the room, polished and complete. Then the solicitor lifted the drawn card. The selected phrase was, "The west window is open." The trustee read it himself. Another trustee checked the seal and signature. The assistant looked toward Frobisher with open fear. Frobisher pointed at him. "He's made an error." "No," Alice said. "He has given the answer you taught him to give when the chair tapped twice." Frobisher demanded that the apparatus be examined. "Now it may be," Alice replied. The cabinet maker opened the manufacturer's access plate. Before witnesses, he exposed the brass resonance strip, stamped F-17, the foot treadle linkage, the speaking tube leading toward the sitter, and the return pipe capable of carrying conversation away. Only after each component had been recorded did he remove the upholstery. The hidden system lay before the room without anyone needing to trust a duke's word. Dr. Latham rose with his daybook. He testified that in 1855, after scarlet fever, Alice could detect a tuning fork through wood, but could not identify whispered words spoken behind her. He made no broader medical claim. Alice opened the black leather case, removed the steel fork, and showed the engraving. 2AC, 1855. She struck it once against the padded block and placed the stem upon the chair arm. A clear vibration passed through the wood. "I feel that," she said. "I still don't hear a sentence." The solicitor then produced the original prospectus naming Miss A.C. as a restored case. Alice confirmed she had never consented. The board secretary opened the genuine minute book. Its entries showed that Lady Muriel had authorized continued use of Alice's identity after receiving written notice of refusal. A second entry recorded the transfer of subscription funds into manufacture without full trustee approval. Lady Muriel stood. "I acted to preserve a charitable work that might have helped hundreds." Alice faced her. "If its success required my silence, whose suffering was the charity meant to serve?" Lady Muriel had no answer. Frobisher tried to blame his assistant. Alice stopped him. "That young man didn't design the treadle. He didn't print my name. He didn't place your foot upon the regulator." The assistant lowered his face. The board dissolved the venture before the room adjourned. Subscription funds were frozen for restitution. Frobisher lost every contracted demonstration, and the solicitor was instructed to place evidence of fraud and covert listening before a magistrate. Chair B and its mechanisms entered legal custody. Lady Muriel was removed from the board, stripped of household management at Norchester House, and made liable to civil recovery of the unauthorized funds. She would reside elsewhere. When Alice had finished, James left the wall and came forward. "I ordered Chair A dismantled before neutral witnesses were present," he said. "That was my error. My rank did not prove Miss Copley truthful, and my belief did not create her truth. She was right before I believed her, and right when I failed to follow her judgment." The board entered his admission into the record. It formally withdrew every suggestion that Alice had pretended deafness. Her professional name was cleared in the same room where it had been attacked. There was no applause. Instead, patrons folded their papers more carefully. 2 former pupils approached her companion to ask when lessons might resume. Truth had not made the room generous. It had made evasion impossible. When the last trustee departed, James remained near the platform. He held out his hand within Alice's sight. She placed hers in it. His fingers closed gently around hers. "I love you, Alice," he said. "I love your courage, your precision, your mercy, and the way you make waiting feel like an honor." Her eyes burned, but her answer came without hesitation. "I love you, James, and I choose you because you learned that my answer belongs to me." He opened his arms only after she stepped closer. Alice embraced him and held him with the same certainty she had brought to the witness table. When they parted, he did not ask for a promise larger than the moment. "May I court you openly now that the scandal is closed?" "Yes," she said, openly and patiently. His smile was quiet and unguarded. "I know no other way worth having." By October, the green silk screen had been removed from Norchester House so completely that no pale line remained upon the winter garden floor where its frame had once stood. 4 months had passed since the public hearing. During that time, James courted Alice with the same patience he had promised in the emptied lecture room. He called at proper hours. He faced her before speaking. He did not treat every silence as permission to fill it. When crowded dinners became difficult, he asked whether she wished to leave, remain, or receive a written account later. He learned which rooms gave her the best light and which hostesses spoke while turning away. Alice learned that his humor sharpened when he was tired, that he read diplomatic reports before breakfast, and that he could sit beside her for half an hour without demanding conversation, merely to prove intimacy. Their engagement, followed only after the formal courtship, had become a choice made in calm, not an answer extracted from scandal. The marriage settlement was discussed in the presence of solicitors and Alice's elderly companion. It protected the savings Alice had earned through her lessons. It named her teaching papers, slate cards, instructional notes, and printed circulars as her own property. It stated that her work could continue under her direction after marriage. James read every clause, asked Alice whether each reflected her wishes, and refused the solicitor's suggestion that some protections were unnecessary between husband and wife. They're necessary precisely because affection shouldn't be asked to perform the work of law, he said. Alice watched his mouth and answered. Then the clause remains. Their wedding took place in a quiet parish church before a small gathering of family witnesses, trusted friends, Dr. Latham, and the elderly widow whose sealed statement had never needed to be opened. Lady Muriel did not attend. By then, she had left Norchester House permanently and lived with her cousin while civil proceedings continued over the unauthorized subscription funds. Simeon Frobisher awaited the magistrate's decision concerning fraud and covert listening. Chair A's dismantled pieces and Chair B's exposed mechanism remained in legal custody. Neither apparatus would ever return to the house. A few weeks after the wedding, Alice stood in the morning room of Norchester House as its mistress, though she had refused to let the household transform that role into ceremonial idleness. Two ordinary chairs faced each other near the windows. A writing table stood between them, supplied with pencils, clean cards, and a small slate. The chairs were not connected to tubes, rods, levers, or hidden cavities. They were simply placed so that two people could see one another clearly. Before the first morning callers arrived, Alice had met with the housekeeper, the butler, and the senior footman. The rules she gave them were simple. No servant was to address her from behind and assume that silence meant comprehension. Anyone wishing for her attention was to enter her sightline first. At crowded receptions, speakers were not to talk across one another if they expected her reply. Written notes would be available when conversation became too rapid. No one was to touch her unexpectedly from behind, even in service. These were not favors granted to the Duchess. They were household practices intended to make communication accurate. James sat beside her during that meeting, but did not issue the instructions. He spoke only when the butler asked how firmly the rules were to be observed. As firmly as any instruction given by Her Grace, he replied. By the second week, the servants no longer announced themselves with unnecessary volume. They waited until Alice looked toward them. The change was neither dramatic nor perfect. A young footman forgot twice and apologized once. A maid began leaving written summaries of messages delivered during noisy calls. The house did not become silent. It became more attentive. On a bright October morning, Alice received a modest gathering of former pupils, several patrons, and two women who wished to learn about reliable methods of communication for relatives whose hearing had declined. There was no platform. No subscription list lay beside a polished invention. Tea was served in the ordinary way. Alice sat where the autumn light reached her face and asked each visitor to speak one at a time. Two pupils who had withdrawn during the scandal had returned to her lessons. A third had sent an apology so elaborate that Alice answered with 3 plain lines and a new appointment time. Her professional circular now bore her married name and title, but the wording remained exact. Instruction by appointment of Alice, Duchess of Norchester. All lessons arranged under her own direction. One visitor, a well-meaning lady with a habit of turning questions into proclamations, noticed the worn black leather case resting near Alice's writing papers. "Is that the instrument which restored your hearing, Your Grace?" Alice waited until the woman faced her fully. Then she opened the case. The steel tuning fork lay inside, lightly tarnished, its engraving still clear. WC to AC, 1855. "No," Alice said, "it restored nothing." The visitor flushed. "I had understood that it proved the chair had helped you." "It proved the opposite." Alice lifted the fork but did not strike it. "My father gave this to me so I could learn the difference between what I felt and what I heard. Years later, it helped one man understand that I knew the difference between hearing and being made to answer." The woman looked toward James, who stood near the mantel, speaking with Dr. Latham. "And His Grace believed you because of it?" Alice returned the fork to its case. "He believed me before he understood it. The difficulty came when he forgot that believing me did not entitle him to decide for me." James had turned during the answer. He crossed the room only after Alice looked toward him. "A lesson I received at some expense, to a perfectly serviceable chair," he said. The visitors laughed, but the humor did not erase the accountability. It acknowledged it. Dr. Latham had brought no daybook that morning. The brown calf volume had returned with him to Lewes after the hearing, where it remained his property and record. He had come only as a guest. He watched Alice close the case and said, "Your father would have approved of the distinction." Alice smiled. "He would have corrected my phrasing first." "Undoubtedly." When the callers departed, the room settled into a softer quiet. Visiting cards lay stacked upon a silver tray. A teacup remained half full beside the window. Alice reviewed a pupil's written exercise, while James spoke briefly with the butler in the hall. When he returned, he did not call her name from the doorway. He crossed until he stood within her sight, then waited. The two ordinary chairs faced one another between them. No green silk divided the room. No pipe ran beneath the floor. No hidden listener waited inside a wall. The black leather case rested closed upon the table. Alice looked at James but did not speak. He smiled and remained still. She reached for his wrist and tapped once. Their signal had changed since the crowded morning call months before. It no longer meant only look at me or wait. In the privacy of their marriage, it could also mean come nearer when she chose it. James stepped between the two chairs, stopping close enough for her to decide the rest at. "Yes?" he asked. Alice rose, placed one hand against his cheek, and kissed him. The affection was warm, familiar, and freely begun. James answered without haste, one hand settling lightly at her waist, while the other remained open beside hers. When they parted, Alice did not move away. She sat in one chair and drew him into the other until their knees nearly touched. James offered his hand. She placed hers in it. The tuning fork remained silent inside its closed case. Nothing trembled beneath the floorboards. No one whispered from behind her. They sat face to face in the clear autumn light, and James waited until Alice chose the first word.